Namaste and welcome everybody on this Saturday evening in India and Saturday morning here in the US. We welcome you to another session of Indica USA online here. We will be having a wonderful discussion between two young economists with the relevance of Kautilya's Arthashastra in the background. But before we do start our session, as we always do, I would like to invite first our friend here, Nishant Limbachia ji, to make a prayer invocation. And then I'll come back and make a quick introduction about Indica and some house rules and all that. So Nishant ji, please.
Yeah. Dhanyawad, Autans bhai. Welcome everyone, Swagatam. As is our tradition, we always begin with a prarthana or a mantra. So today I'm going to do a little bit of stuti from Devi Mahatmya, from Durga Saptasati. All Jai. Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadhike Sharanye Trambake Gauri Narayani Namostute. Narayani Namostute.
Dhanyawad, Nishant bhai. Nishant bhai is one of our national coordinator here in the US. Another one is Ram, but due to some personal issues, he is not able to join in today. Usually we all three of us are here whenever we have our event. But quickly, first of all, what we will do is I will make a quick introduction about Indica and some house rules. And then I will invite Kushagra to take it from there. So about Indica, we are a non-traditional university for traditional knowledge. We seek to build a global renaissance based on Indic civilizational thought. We are pursuing multidimensional strategy across time, space, and cause by establishing centers of excellence, transforming intellectuals, and building an ecosystem. We offer grants and scholarships for individuals in pursuit and the spread of Indic knowledge. We build partnerships and alliances with universities, schools, colleges, research institutions, NGOs, media, etc. We have several platforms that promote and deliver Indic content, services, and experiences. We conduct online and offline courses. Please look us up on the internet for online courses if you're interested. We guide research on select topics through our fellowship programs. We publish books by academics and public intellectuals across genres. We conduct events such as this one, conferences, seminars, workshops, and talks throughout our growing global network of chapters. In the USA, we are a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, and all contributions are tax exempt. We are in the domain of Indian cultural tradition. Please visit our website at indicacademy.org or indicausa.org to explore and navigate our activities, platforms, and initiatives. We have an active presence in social media. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we are at Indic Academy, indica.org. So that's a brief introduction of Indica. What we will be doing here is as the conversation goes on, please feel free, to those who are registered and watching us on Zoom, please feel free to put your questions in the chat bubble, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Towards the end of the conversations, once Sriram and Kushagra are done talking, we'll take up your questions. And also, if you are watching us on Facebook, you can tweet also by using hashtag Ask Indica, and we'll try to collect some of those questions from our social media platform as well. So before I hand it over to Kushagra to take the session forward, a quick word about Kushagra. Kushagra Aniket is currently an economic and management consultant based in New York, USA. Kushagra is a graduate summa cum laude from Cornell University as a Tata Scholar with degrees in economics, mathematics, and statistics. He completed an MBA in finance with Dean's Honors from Columbia University in New York. Kushagra has received multiple awards in both India and the US for his writings in poetry as well as prose that span 3 languages, English, Hindi, and Sanskrit. He is also a Sangeet Visharad in Hindustani vocal music. I have known Kushagra and his family for a long time, and he is also known for his Sanskrit tweets. So if you are interested, follow him on Twitter and other social media platforms. He's an outstanding scholar, and I give it to Kushagra to take this session forward. Kushagra, welcome to this session.
Kushagra-ji, we can't hear you. Probably
unmute yourself.
No, maybe double muted somewhere.
Are you using Bluetooth? Because I hear some noise, but nothing clear.
Let me rejoin. I will rejoin the conference.
Okay. We can see you now.
Yeah, it was clear for a bit. So anybody who has not yet, Sriramji just joined us. So anybody who has not checked out his pretty good book, I would say. I've read some parts of it, not completely, but it's available on Amazon. You can go out. It's also available as an ebook. So if you have Kindles, you can read them on it, or a physical copy as well. So Sriramji, if you have the book, you can raise it. People can see the cover. That would be great.
Yeah. And I know Kushagra will take it, do the introduction of Sriramji. But in the meantime, I will quickly do his introduction. Sriram Balasubramanian is a reputed economist and author whose key areas of interest include global macroeconomics, economic trends in emerging markets, new growth models, Indic Dharmic culture, and an innate passion for India's socio-economic happenings. He has contributed op-eds and interviews to publications such as New York Times, Foreign Policy, Forbes India, Bloomberg, The Hindu, The Times of India, Swaraj, among others. He has authored 2 books, Jamba, The Joint Family, and The Wizards, US version. The former was launched by Amish Tripathi, India's #1 selling author, and was shortlisted to be at the 3rd Annual Literary Festival, IIAC Festival, by the Indo-American Art Council. His 3rd book is Kautilya for Modern Times, has sold thousands of copies in India and a national bestseller. The book has had multiple reprints and was the top book on economic history in Amazon, India for 2022. He's an alumnus of Columbia University. So both are the author and the moderator are Columbia alums. And is Kushagra back in?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well. So
okay, great.
I quickly did, the written intro that we have of Sriram, but you can take it from here. And as we have mentioned, please put your questions in chat box, and we'll collect them and then ask them later on. So Kushag, it's all yours.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Avatansji and Nishantji and the entire Indica family. Apologies for the slight technical issue earlier. Sriramji, it's an honor to be speaking with you today. Thank you so much for taking out this time. I have been reading your book over the last week, and I'm very excited to delve into this conversation. As Avatansji was mentioning, Sriramji is a reputed economist working with one of the largest international organizations in the world, and he has been a familiar face in the Indic economic world with a couple of books to his credit. This book that we are going to discuss today, Kautilyanomics for Modern Times, is a rarity of its kind in the sense that there have been a lot of research on the Arthashastra, but very few people have brought it as a relevant document for contemporary times. So that is why we are excited to get into this discussion. I think without much ado, we can start our conversation. When I was reading this book, I was actually very intrigued to learn about, to think about the process of writing and research that would have gone behind this book. Because we have read a lot about the Arthashastra and the economic ideas that are contained in it. But I am very curious, Sriramji, as to what led you to research this particular topic and write this book. What are some of the interesting things that you encountered while conducting this research?
Thanks, Kushag. Thanks to everyone at Indica, Avatansji, Nishanji, for providing me this opportunity. Of course, to Harikiran, Vadlamani Ji, who's been, sort of a mentor of sorts. It's a pleasure to be part of Indica again, and I'm glad to talk about the book. And sorry for the delay. So to kickstart, I think the inspiration for this book was, I would say, accidental in a sense, like most creative endeavors. We chance upon things along the way. The divine throws at us, and somehow the pieces come together. I was working on Angus Madison's data set, which is basically the historical data set, which a lot of people talk about, but often people don't really, analyze the data set. But I was working on it in my professional capacity, and when I was looking at it, it somehow struck me that Angus Madison is basically he's no more now. Was a world-renowned historian. He had produced a data set of about 1,000 years of economic GDP data and GDP per capita data. So one of his findings, among his many other sort of observations, was that India and China were the top one and two countries in the world in terms of GDP and GDP per capita from 0C onwards till about the 17th century. So this was a sort of an anecdotal observation, an empirical observation which he made, and he compiled his data over a period of time. So my basic thinking was that, this prosperity that we keep talking about all the time, from our ancient history, all the civilizational might that Bharat had over thousands of years before, had to have some economic underpinning. It wasn't, it's often attributed to be some random thought process which led to some of this prosperity, or it just happened by chance, but my view was that there had to be a systemic sort of philosophy behind it, and the philosophy had to have a sort of a line of thinking which facilitated this huge amount of progress, which made India probably one of the world beaters. And then I also chanced upon the Arthashastra, which was a text which came to me almost a decade back. I always wondered, why is it called the Arthashastra and no one talks anything about the Artha part of the Arthashastra? Because much of the discussion was, around Chanakya Niti, the political side of Chanakya, and sort of the business self-help side of Chanakya, and the astuteness of and the defense sort of capability of Chanakya, of Kautilya and Chanakya. So, but this is primarily called the Arthashastra for a reason. So, what is the Artha part of the Arthashastra was my basic question. So, these three things sort of came together, and then I decided to explore about the text, about the manuscript, and things like that. So these were sort of the triggers for, I would put it that way, for me sort of venturing into the subject. But having ventured into the subject, it's again a huge ocean of knowledge and information. And first of all, you had to deal with the text. The text itself is very multidimensional. People who have read the translations of the text would probably understand. It covers a wide range of areas. But the way it's written, it's in dense Sanskritam. It is, it requires a nuance to understand what Kautilya is trying to say. And you also needed subject matter expertise. So one, you need a skill to understand the text, meaning learn Sanskritam to an extent, work with Sanskritam scholars to derive the essence of what Kautilya is talking about. Given that there are only about 3-4 translations, and most of the translations are quite old, they are done by linguists who don't have subject matter expertise and things like that. So that is the first part of it. The second part of it is to bring subject matter expertise, in this case, economics and finance, which I bring to the table, and derive a framework. Because most of our ancient texts, especially in contemporary ancient texts which are used in contemporary parlance, they are structured in a way where they give you the output more than the philosophy, the thinking behind the output. So it's almost you have to go into Kautilya's head based on all the inputs they've given and derive a framework. So that's where the idea of Dharmic capitalism and a Dharmic capitalism framework was derived, and Kautilya's vision of economic philosophy through the idea of Dharma was centered on. And then contextualize it to today's times. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about the book, or probably the book wouldn't have sold this much if it wasn't contextualized to today's times. So each chapter is a particular theme, which deals with, say, trade, inequality, labor contracts, sustainable growth. So all these chapters deal with an economic theme, and then we go back to Kautilya's time to think about, to share what are the things that happened during Kautilya's time, and then we look at today's times and look at what the challenges are in today's world. And then there's a Kautilyan Tantra at the end of it. And the Kautilyan Tantra basically gives an idea or a couple of ideas from Kautilya's mind, which is applicable today. So that is the broad context and of the book and the thinking behind it and some of the challenges of the book. That's why it took, say, about 5 years to do this, because it's a sort of a genuine work by itself. So it's taken much more time than probably writing a few op-eds about just translations. So that's why I think a lot of due diligence had to be done. And I'm glad I did it because it has really opened up new ventures and avenues. But yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, yes. That sounds really very interesting. And it is also fascinating to learn that behind the economic policies or mechanisms that are mentioned by Kautilya, because if you read the Arthashastra, it sounds very much like a prescriptive text on what the king's officials, what the government should be doing. But behind all that, in the first chapter itself, Kautilya talks about a philosophical or ethical framework behind his entire worldview. The word that he uses is anvikshaki, and there is a very famous verse that appears there: Pradipaha sarva vidyanam, upayah sarva karmanam, ashrayah sarva dharmanam, shashvadanvikshaki mata. He essentially sees anvikshaki, which is the philosophical framework, as the lamp behind the entire knowledge systems that he draws upon. So would be interesting to start our conversation by discussing some of the overarching frameworks that Kautilya proposes and how then those relate to the actual economic policies that he further mentions.
Yeah, that's very useful. Yes, indeed, Anvikshiki is what that shloka and its importance to Kautilya's Arthashastra is also something that is evident. I think how does one see this is an important question because of the fact that Kautilya himself hasn't laid out, what his philosophy is. You're right; it sounds prescriptive. But before I get into the philosophy, I want to probably just mention a bit on this point. It's important to understand that the Arthashastra was written as a sort of a template, in the sense it was just Kautilya as a thinker. He just wanted to bring out a set of ideas in the text. It doesn't necessarily mean, nor does it imply, that either the Mauryans or Chandragupta Maurya or anyone else used every part of Kautilya's thinking, right? There's no evidence to suggest that Kautilya himself thinks that every part of whatever that he says should be implemented at the same time, right? So it's a question of what are the things that you want to choose, given a context, given a scenario. So it's like a textbook, right? A textbook consists of everything, every theory that you want to know about a particular subject, right? But for a particular problem that you want to solve, you choose only one chapter in the textbook or a combination of ideas in the textbook and then use it to solve a problem, right? So that's how you should view the Arthashastra. Because the problem often is we take the Arthashastra on face value too much, in the sense that we think everything that he says should be simultaneously implemented everywhere, right? Neither did the Mauryans do this, nor did Kautilya himself say that, it has to be done that way. So that is one, sort of minor comment which I wanted to mention. On the frameworks, yes, there is, in fact, I mentioned it in this book, where, when I talk about frameworks, this is, I think, in chapter 3, around, say, page 65 of the book, for those who have it. One theory is that there are 4 main components to Kautilya's thinking, which is, Vartha, Dandaniti, Anvikshi, and Trai. My take is I agree with 3 of them. The first 3 of them, I just feel that Trai as a cultural context is sort of is an underpinning throughout the text. It's a sort of a horizontal, in business parlance, across the text. So it's there in all the contours. But for all of these things, the entire focus of the Anvikshi is based on the idea of Dharma. So Kautilya philosophy is based fundamentally on the idea of Dharma and the components of Dharma. So that's where this Dharmic capitalism, framework which I bring, it could be termed in a different way. It's just that for easier sort of communication for an anglicized audience, I wanted to sort of bring it with the capitalism, lingo. So I define Dharma through three. I mean, there are various ways to define Dharma, of course. That itself is a book by itself. But to really simplify, I focus on ethics, responsibilities, and harmony. Within ethics, I talk about outcomes related to the Dharmic capitalism, which is clean administration, clean institutions, enforcement of rules, and driver of economic growth and wealth creation. And this is mapped on to one big component of Dharmic capitalism, which is rule-based, not yet non-intrusive state. The same thing from harmony. I talk about global outlook, social welfare and well-being, and that leads to wealth creation via global outlook, which is another bucket of Dharmic capitalism. And then responsibilities in terms of familial, societal, and environmental responsibilities and sustainable growth, that leads to sustainable growth and welfare. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that the definition of Dharma through ethics, harmony, and responsibilities, and this sort of maps through these outcomes, which I mentioned, through to the components of Dharmic capitalism, which is a rule-based yet non-intrusive state, wealth creation via global outlook, and sustainable growth and welfare. So when I mean a rule-based yet non-intrusive state, it's basically a state which tries to implement the rules, which means you have strong implementation of rules, strong punishments. If you violate the rules, the rule of law is followed to the T, but it doesn't micromanage. It doesn't tell you who you need to trade with, how much you need to trade with. It doesn't sort of micromanage yourself. So that is what is a rule-based yet non-intrusive state in a very, very simplified manner. Wealth creation via global outlook, what we call a globalized world, was very prominent during Kautilya's times. In fact, globalization was the norm in India through thousands of years, where we engaged with the rest of the world, except for probably post-independent India till about the 1990s. Most of India's sort of economic history is by default global in nature. So that is an important point, which one needs to understand. And then the idea of sustainability. So Kautilya is, thinking on protecting the environment, protecting natural resources, protecting forests, both for sort of political reasons, sort of military reasons, as well as for genuine sustainability reasons. And the focus on responsibilities, both in terms of environment, for the community, both in terms of the society, for the family, and for people outside. I think those things, along with the focus on welfare, sustainable growth and welfare, where Kautilya believed in more targeted welfare for people who actually needed it, and how to support them and empower them. So lastly, I want to leave with this quotation, which I think defines the Arthashastra and the philosophy of the Arthashastra, because it's a very important quotation. It goes like this: Praja sukhe sukham rajnyaha prajanam cha hitetam nat preyam hitam rajnyaha prajanam ta preyamitam. So loose translation is: king's happiness lies in the happiness of his subjects, and his welfare in the welfare of his subjects. A king's welfare consists not in what pleases him, but in what pleases his subjects. So Kautilya's Arthashastra is basically premised on this. It is premised on enhancing the welfare of the common person, and how economic prosperity does that. And he believes that only if there is economic prosperity and the common person's welfare is enhanced, political success could be sustainable. So he was an astute politician, but he had a very good understanding of economics and its impact on political outcomes. And the entire Arthashastra, if you notice, the focus is on the welfare of the people. Even the king, Kautilya says that, and his kith and kin, if they're not competent, they can be replaced. He says that, if they're not taking care of the welfare of the people, they can be replaced. So I think the focus primarily on the Arthashastra, why it's different from Machiavelli and all these other, people that he gets compared often, unfortunately, with, is that Kautilya's focus is on the welfare of the people. His focus is not to protect the kingdom or the king. he's focused on protecting, the people, and as a consequence, the state. So I think there's a very distinct difference there. But anyway, so these are the components of, say, I would say, the philosophical framework. What I mentioned about Dharma, the definitions of Dharma, ethics, harmony, and responsibilities, and some of the outcomes that come out of this, and that's mapped to the idea of a rule-based yet non-intrusive state, wealth creation via global outlook, and sustainable growth and welfare. And these three buckets are what I define as Dharmic capitalism, Kautilya's Dharmic capitalism in the book.
That sounds very interesting, and this terminology itself is fascinating, Dharmic capitalism. How do you distinguish that from pre-market capitalistic ideas that emerged in the last 200 years? And also, in the times of Kautilya, as you were earlier mentioning, not everything that he mentioned in the Arthashastra was implemented. So what evidence, or what are some of the ingredients of Dharmic capitalism that you find evidence for actual implementation in the times of Kautilya?
Yeah. On your first question, I think how is Dharmic capitalism probably different to other forms of models? Okay, so look, contemporary economics, macroeconomics, even today, is a sort of a binary intellectual exercise. You either have the Keynesians who believe in the role of the state a bit more, where they feel the state can be, act in triggering economic policy, meaning, the state can pump in money to build infrastructure, the state can give employment or doles or whatever it is. The state acts as some sort of a trigger to tweak economic activity and economic policy. And that role of the state is much more in a sort of a Keynesian worldview, in very, very simple terms, right? And in a laissez-faire sort of system, which is, which is a philosophy that believes that the markets are fundamental to economic prosperity and progress, and the markets and the competition that markets provide, facilitates all that is required for economic activity. And the role of a state is a mere regulator, and the state just oversees and doesn't really intervene. So these two sort of philosophical systems of were literally what has been driving economics for the last 100 to 200 years, right? So the difference in Kautilya is he believes that the state and the market don't need to be, strangulated so much. And if the foundation of Dharma was there, the role of Dharma can sort of facilitate and ensure that the state and market are not strangulated that much. And the choices are not binary. So what do I mean? So let me give an example, right? So let's imagine there is, say, corruption at the state, right? So, for example, in some of these schemes, implementation schemes, there is corruption, there is, bureaucrats siphoning of money or whatever it is, right? In a sort of a Kautilyan model, if a state is more dharmic, the people are more dharmic, their propensity to indulge in corrupt activities is far lesser compared to a sort of less focused dharmic society, right? So the prevention of corruption is already taken care by the enhancement of Dharma and the refinement of Dharma as a foundation. So that reduces the propensity to be corrupt. So that sort of takes away some of the pressure from the state to act on these people, because by nature, people's propensity is reduced because they're more dharmic about their way of life. The same thing with the market. Say there is moral hazard in the market, in the sense there is, a big company trying to snoop and take over a small company without any rights, or without any, or the market is somehow tweaked in a way to support the big company much more than a small player. Again, the role of Dharma plays a role, where the idea of equity, the idea of being Dharmic to other people, and the philosophy behind that reduces the propensity even for private stakeholders to engulf the smaller player at a philosophical level. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that Kautilya felt that the focus on Dharma and a Dharmic way of life and enhancing Dharma played an important role in reducing the pressure on both the state and the market, and sort of liberated them to an extent. So what happened is people, this provided a much better foundation according to Kautilya, and the tweaks could be done in the way of life itself, and enhancing their way of life and their Dharmic philosophies, instead of having this binary between the state and the market. So that's how I would sort of put Kautilya in his thinking in the wider scheme of things. But I think it's far more relevant today because a lot of the issues that we deal with, sustainability, climate change, even debt resolution, all of this eventually, at least in economics, or most of, decisions or economic policies depend on individual behavioral choices. If, say, me and you today in this conversation decide not to do Zoom for some reason, and we go to another outlet, that is and it's say if that economic choice is related to some cultural background that we have for some reason, then that is having an impact on the economic activity. So I think the idea, because of the fact that economics by nature is such a behavioral, is so sensitive to behavioral choices, I think Kautilya felt that addressing that root through the idea of Dharma and enhancing Dharma makes it almost like an autopilot. So you don't need to tell people to be sustainable. Their way of life itself is sustainable in how they treat the environment and things like that. And obviously, to complement this, Kautilya believed in the rule of law and order. It's not like he felt that this could take over everything. He believed in the rule of law and order, but he also believed that foundationally, the idea of Dharma should be complementary to the rule of order and a Dharmic way of life, and that philosophy complements that as the rule of law as well. So that's how I would see Kautilya's Dharmic capitalism in a wider context. And your second question, could you repeat that? I don't know whether I've answered.
Yes, my second question was about what evidence did you see for the actual implementation of some of these policies in ancient times? And there is actually a very interesting question also coming through our audience, which is about, are there any instances of Kautilya's policies being implemented in today's era? Which is very interesting because in your book, you devote a lot of discussion to actual economic policies and schemes, whether it is economic liberalization, whether it is gold monetization, and so on, and how those can be related to Kautilya's idea. So it would be interesting to know about historical implementation and also present times, what are some of the instances of actual execution of his policies?
Yeah. Historically, I think there is, for example, a lot of the trade that we see historically, maritime trade, some of the contours of the maritime trade, some of the regulations. For example, Vartani is basically someone who carries, who helps to carry goods from one place to another. Kautilya used to provide support for importers to move their goods safely from one place to another. And there used to be a cess for that as well. But what I'm trying to say is he had in place systems for trade, I think, which were there for quite a long time. In terms of taxation, he gave some imports, exemptions for imports. He sort of promoted imports, variety of products, diversification of products we talk about today. Kautilya focused a lot on that. Labor contracts. We talk so much about labor contracts today, even for people at the lowest level, right? For daily wage laborers. Kautilya argues that in any sort of establishment, there has to be a template for a contract for a daily wage laborer. And he says that template needs to be publicly displayed so that the daily wage laborer is empowered. he or she knows how much they're going to work, how long, and there is some understanding between the employer and the employee. So this again is empowerment. He's trying to empower the poor, empower the welfare of the poor. Same thing with Matsya Nyaya, which is basically one needs to avoid Matsya Nyaya. You don't want the big fish eating the small fish. He had in place a lot of systems. For example, rule of law. He wanted to ensure that even the most poorest person could get access for a dispute and get resolved in an amicable manner. And the idea of minimum wage, we talk a lot about minimum wages today. $15 in the US. Kautilya believed in the idea of a flexible minimum wage, which is again very innovative, because $15 an hour at 2% inflation is very different from $15 an hour at, say, 7% inflation, right? So he believed that you had to change some of these where minimum wages, keep monitoring them relative to other indicators and how they need to be modified. And then he also believed in targeted interventions. So he didn't believe in, giving people doles all the time. He believed that people who are empowered, who need to be empowered, who really need the money, they could be, provided resources. Whereas the others need to, work their way to the ladder. But he believed in providing opportunities to everyone. So these are some instances, I would say. In contemporary times, I think that we could see a lot of overlap of what I'm talking about between today's times and what happened then. Labor contracts is one thing which we are still seeking to do to ensure that all people come into some sort of a contractual system, all employers across board, informal, formal sector. Second is the idea of, minimum wages, which you spoke about, which is still, prevalent in modern times. Third is probably the idea of, resolution of contracts, the ability to have contracts and then promote trade across borders is another sort of attribute, I would say, from Kautilya's time, which is relevant today. And lastly, we should also look at the philosophy of Kautilya, right? The philosophy of Kautilya is exemplified by something like Swachh Bharat, for example. Because in Swachh Bharat, there's a reason why Swachh Bharat is more successful in rural areas than urban areas. Because it's almost triggered the Dharmic consciousness of, being Saucham, which is very clean, which is one definition of Dharma, and enhancing the cleanliness from within our houses to the neighborhood outside. And now it's almost autopilot because of the Prime Minister and its huge scheme and the machinery has ensured that people are very conscious about this and they want to keep their neighborhood and clean and cleaner than before. So I think, again, philosophically, there are similarities. Structurally, one-to-one, there are, again, some of the ideas which are still relevant today, which people use. They wouldn't directly use Kautilya's, probably not as name directly, but I wouldn't, be surprised, because there's no literature available to tell them that Kautilya thought this way. So, till some of these books have come out. But yeah, there are definitely some of these things which are implemented and some of the things which are relevant today.
Yes, I think let us try to then talk about a few of these topics, because all of these are very interesting. For example, you mentioned the measures that Kautilya suggests to promote free trade. So first of all, do you think Kautilya was an advocate of free trade, and how did he see free trade as operating within this rules-based framework? Because when we read the Arthashastra, just like a layperson, it sounds like he recommends a lot of restrictions, tariffs, cesses, etc., on the movement of goods. But overarching behind that, there is this concept that trade should proceed without hindrance. So how do you see that?
Yeah. See, that's why it's very important, right, to understand the underlying philosophical underpinning. Because if, say, there is a table which gives you 100 cesses, right, for a variety of things, it doesn't mean that all of them need to be implemented at the same time, right? how do we assess Kautilya? We should assess Kautilya based on what he's thinking. I mean, what are the contours of a thinker, of an economist who is looking at trade? First, they need to engage with the world. They need to be open with engaging with the world. That's probably one of the primary things, because you have Greeks, you have the Arabs, you have the Chinese, you have all of them coming into Bharat and trading, and their goods and our goods going there and all these things. So you need to engage with the world. So that's one philosophical point. Second is, you have to have a mindset of commerce. You have to have a mindset of, to trade and to expand the pie, to expand the economy and expand, whatever that's needed. And third, you should also have a focus of providing employment for the people, for the lower sections of people, right? And fourth, you also provide incentives for traders, because only if you provide incentives will that you are favorable for trade, right? On all these four counts, right? If you look at Kautilya, does he want to engage with the rest of the world? From whatever is there in Arthashastra, he seems to be a fairly open-minded person. He seems to acknowledge that trading partners are there. He gives a list of things that needs to be done for trade. So he's very much open to the idea of engaging the rest of the world. So the idea of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam also comes in the text, where he talks about that in some contours. So his thinking on that is I would take a box and say someone who's favorable for trade. Same thing with incentives. So he provides incentives for importers. He provides incentives for traders who are coming from abroad, for transportation, for safety. He provides, his taxation is very lean. And it's, about 15 to 20% is his average sort of rate of taxation, which is again empowering businesses, empowering traders. And lastly, he saw this as an opportunity for common people to gain employment and sort of get empowered. He keeps mentioning in many places that the economic prosperity from trade is a way for common people to get more jobs, more employment. So all of these tend to indicate that Kautilya was a fairly open to the idea of trade. Whether he was an extreme on trade is a different question, right? He was probably again a pragmatist, and Kautilya was a political economist. So he absolutely understood the politics of economics. He understood the need for trade to provide employment opportunities, but he also understood that excessive trade could cause people to feel, alienated if production is not happening at home. So I think he did a balance of both, where whenever is required, he opened up for trade, and whenever some of these barriers needed to be put, when required, he also used that. But his primary purpose was, I would say, he was focusing more on resilience, something to an extent of Atmanirbharta. And for key resources, he wanted some protection. But other than that, I don't think he is. Again, I think he's fairly sometimes wrongly accused of being too protectionist. That's not the feeling I get. My sense is he's open to trade. He provides incentives for trade and traders, and he believed that was an important pillar of economic prosperity. But he's also cognizant of some of the political repercussions of having a too open society, and also building resilience as an important, survival tactic for his own kingdom and things like that.
Yes, that makes sense. And in fact, it is very interesting that Kautilya was unique in the sense that he saw trade as an engine of overall economic growth rather than just a mechanism to enrich the state's coffers. There were many political scientists from this time and elsewhere in the world, for example, who thought that trade was just a means to enrich the state treasury. But I think he takes a broader view
Yeah,
to see it as an engine of overall prosperity.
Yeah, see, another thing is I deal it with my subsequent book, which I'm coming up with on common era kingdoms and some of their economic models. One important point is in India, the idea of Srinis, which is corporate guilds, is very, very consistent throughout our history. And it has been an important driver of economic activity throughout, and especially on trade, throughout history, including Kautilya's time. But it's also very, in this particular context, very important to note, Srinis are completely privately held.
Yeah.
They're run by, traders, and they're run by, guilds, and traders who form these guilds, and they're privately run majorly, right? And most of these guilds are drivers of economic activity. What I'm trying to say is that if Kautilya was so protectionist or had that tendency or the tendency of, say, the state really controlling everything, the state should have intervened and sort of taken over all these guilds, which they haven't. The state merely plays a sort of an observer role. And Kautilya sees the state and the king is basically protecting the people's rights. Rather than some, godforsaken entity that comes and, protects everyone else. So I think the role of guilds is also an important, underlying theme.
Yes, that's certainly a very important point. Moving on, because we also mentioned some of the social security policies or social security schemes to tackle inequality and poverty in India. Kautilya certainly has mentioned a few of these ideas, so wanted to get your thoughts on that and how can some of those be seen as applicable today?
Yeah. Again, thinking out loud, if we look at Kautilya's philosophy and thinking again, the idea of Matsya is mentioned in a couple of instances, quotations, but that's largely on the idea of rule-based society, in the sense, why you should have a rule of law so that the big fish does not eat the small fish. Okay. So that rule of law is implemented to the T. But Matsya is also applicable in the idea of inequality as well, where eventually the big fish also takes over a small fish if there's too high an inequality, right? So, and he also believes in the idea of empowerment of the poor and the welfare of the poor. So the idea of Matsya is also evident in his policies related to inequality, where he believes that empowering people is important to address inequality. So in fact, I gave a lecture at IIM Bangalore last year, for those who are interested, a full lecture purely on how Kautilya's approach to equitable growth, where I talk about some of the key policies that he did to ensure he reduces inequality and have sustainable, equitable growth, for those who are interested. But some of the things that he's done is, for example, he believes in providing opportunities for the poor, enabling them in terms of, if there is any dispute, they are getting equal rights as the other person. If there is any employment-related, labor-related issue, they have a contract. They can engage with the employer, no matter how big the employer is. They have a rule of law, which is again empowering them. And then he also has, economic opportunities through trade and things like that, which is coming to them. So enhancing the opportunity pie as well for the lower sections of people. And for the others, despite providing these systems, there are some others who require, extreme assistance. He provides this targeted intervention, targeted resources. So a combination of all this is what I would say is his view of inequality, where he feels that a combination of targeted intervention coupled with providing opportunities, equitable opportunities to people, is something that I think would be is a sort of worldview with regard to inequality. But again, it goes, look at the thread of thought. His primary focus is on welfare of the people. How do you enhance welfare of the people? You provide them opportunities, you provide them education, you provide them parity in legal systems, parity in dispute systems, and then for those who really need whatever resources for now to survive the next day, I provide you some sort of income, and I keep it targeted so that you're not too lazy to look out for all these opportunities. And all of these things are, the layer above it is things like trade, which provides opportunities, agriculture, it provides income, and the components of the economy, which I'm talking about a structure, but the verticals to this is what I mentioned about the Dharmic capitalism framework. That is, the philosophy is a state which is strong but doesn't intervene, but wealth creation which is open but engaging in the rest of the world, and then sustainable growth and welfare. But anyway, so his view of inequality, I would sort of put it into this bucket. And I think that's very much in his thinking of avoiding Matsya Nyaya. And how to do that from an equitable sense is also something that he looked at.
Yes, that is very interesting. And finally, as you were touching upon sustainable growth, so I was wondering, there's a chapter in your book devoted to Kautilya's ideas of sustainable growth. What did Kautilya think about sustainable growth? How did he define it? And what can we learn from that today?
Yeah, see, sustainability again is a big topic, but I think probably for people who are listening in, it'll help them to read the book. But just to give you a snippet, see, he focused a lot on the idea of responsibilities. I think he sort of understood inherently that sustainability is an individual choice at a very basic level, which aggregates to be, say, a national or an international choice. So, through the prism of responsibilities, so he spoke about the idea of familial responsibilities within your own family, in terms of protecting your own family and protecting your own kith and kin. He talked about environmental responsibilities, people around you, the environment around you, protecting the forest, protecting, he gives fines, for example, for people who don't protect their own forest, who ransack forests. He provides incentives for protecting some of the wildlife around, and some of the natural resources around. And he believed that this was integral for a sustainable society. And then the societal responsibilities is the third part, where beyond your home and your immediate neighborhood, you look at a society at large and do activities which enhance other people's or provide support to other people, and then enhance the environment as well. And these are sort of mentioned in various parts of the text, where there are chapters where he talks about fines and implementations of what are the things that people can do, what are the fines which people can violate some of these on some of these issues. So that is one important sort of component of sustainability, I would say. One is on the environment and protecting the environment, and both the role of the familial responsibility and societal responsibility. And the last part is the issue of welfare as well. I mean, I would put that in the sustainability bucket as well. In terms of people, he believed it in terms of targeted welfare, targeted sort of resource transfer. And these would be, in my view, sort of pillars. But I think the approach of through the prism of responsibility rather than the imposition of the state, right? You wouldn't, I mean, while there were fines for people who violated some of these things, he still made an attempt to sort of cater to their, innate instincts to protect the environment. And those are seen also, I would say, I mean, from whatever I've seen, those are also unique attributes. And the idea of responsibility along with the rule of law to approach an issue of sustainability.
There's a very interesting question coming from the audience. What would have Kautilya thought of ESG, environment, social, and governance policies?
Yeah. Interesting. So, if you think about Kautilya's thinking, he did not believe the state can impose itself towards sustainability. And I think he would also agree that the private sector itself cannot impose itself, impose its way to sustainability. I think sustainability is a behavioral choice at a very basic level, or at least that's how I feel Kautilya would view. And unless individuals are aligned through a way of lifestyle to incorporate sustainable practices, it won't aggregate, at the company level or even at the state level. So I think the idea of ESG, I mean, it's anyone's guess, but my guess is he would not put too much weight around it. Being a shrewd politician, he might just consider it and put a commission and see if this thing can work. But in all likelihood, he might just say that, this doesn't. I don't think he would be a votary of it, put it that way. My sense is he would focus more on some of the individual choices that people make.
Yes, I think I would agree with that. That sounds more like him to work through the actual policies and make a case-by-case judgment decision on each of them. So that sounds good. I think lastly, you were earlier also mentioning that you are working on another book and there are some other future ideas for research that are outstanding from this book. So it would be interesting to learn about what are those new avenues.
This is basically, like I mentioned, it's a huge research, it has huge research potential. So my next book is a sequel to this. So we are looking at 3rd century BC here on Kautilya. So what I'm trying to do is I'm looking at common era kingdoms, the Chola, the Pandya, the Pallava empires, the Angkor Empire, Kambujidesa in Cambodia, the Hindu kingdoms in Cambodia, and Vijayanagar Empire. So I'm trying to see, first of all, elucidate some of their economic philosophies. And coincidentally, a lot of Arthashastra's mentions are there in some of these places. And inspirations from the Arthashastra, even in Cambodia today. So I'm trying to flesh out some of them and then focus on these Dharmic based economic models and then try to bring out their philosophy. So that's my next book, which I'm working. Bloomsbury's will be publishing it hopefully sometime next year. But that's exciting work. But the idea is really to show that there's a time series of an economic giant for thousands of years, and also a time series of an economic philosophy, which is far longer than any modern contemporary sort of economic parlance. I mean, globalization is in today's parlance is a 20-30 year project. We're talking about thousands of years. So that is sort of the aim, to bring that also out, that context.
This is very interesting. Are there any kingdoms or states that continue to refer to the Arthashastra as some sort of a guiding principle behind their work? Because in the case of India, Arthashastra, as you know, was lost for a long period of time, and people just knew the name of Kautilya, but they did not have the actual text. You mentioned that in Cambodia, it may still be applicable. Are there say other kingdoms like Thailand or Nepal pre the communist revolution who may have referred to the Arthashastra in their economic policies?
No, see, definitely ancient Cambodia, meaning when I mean ancient, the Khmer Empire, or till even the 9th century, 10th century when Angkor Wat was built, and even till about 13th century. In fact, I have an inscription, 13th century CE, which talks about Arthashastra, I think around 13th century CE, I'll probably verify that, but around that time, which talks about Arthashastra as mentioned in Cambodia. So there has been definitely, mentions these texts in the past. In some of the current sort of countries, I think some of them use it. The royalty in Thailand, for example, their ancestral festivals are all, even today done by. I hear it's done by with some Hindu, priests and lineage also to it, and they also have some philosophical references which they make. Even in Indonesia, for example, where they talk about Mahabharata a lot in some of their political discourse. So it is there. I wouldn't say in a very stark way, but I think if you start peeling the layers, but probably that's another research topic by itself. Something I need to look at in today's times, which countries, adopt some of our ancient ideas without us even knowing, for example.
Yes, that's certainly an interesting research topic in itself. In the case of India, I think Arthashastra was lost a long time ago. For example, even during the time of Bharatiya, we get references to the Arthashastra, and in fact, people are advised not to follow the doctrines of Kautilya. It is possible that Kautilya became associated with certain things while the text that he himself wrote was lost by that time. So yes, it would be interesting to see if there are any enduring traditions of referring to the Arthashastra or to Kautilya in designing your governance. I think we are just coming towards the end of our one-on-one discussion. I will now hand it over to Avatansji, who has been collating some of the audience questions, and pass it on to him.
Okay, thank you, Kushagra. Thanks for running this wonderful conversation. And I think you already picked up a few questions from the audience. But I still have a couple of them, so I will try to ask those questions. Okay, so one of the questions is from Ashish Sinha, audience question, and I read it. An economist naturally bases himself in space and time. In Kautilya's case, it is Patliputra and the Mauryan Empire around 300 BCE. Does it mean that not just statecraft, but economics and commerce were so much developed at the time? That's a question. And that there was a need for such an advisory academician too?
Yeah, so I would remodify this question as an answer to the question itself. So, for example, I don't know how many of you have been to the Bharatiya temple in Tamil Nadu, in Tanjavur. The Bharatiya temple is a Chola era temple. Is one of the largest temples in the world. Not just that, it is an architectural marvel by itself, right? There are so many of these temples in the south which are architectural marvels, which we find it so difficult to replicate even today. Just the sheer scale, the design. The Bharatiya temple has survived many earthquakes, and their sort of complexity. What I'm trying to say is that society was fairly, complex in their understanding of a lot of these engineering facets during those times. And a lot of people in ancient India had, exchanges with the rest of the world on a variety of things, in terms of goods, in terms of resources, in terms of people, right? So if you can build an engineering marvel such as this, which is difficult to replicate even today, then how can, say, something as mundane as economic activity be not complex? I mean, you had to have resources to build such institutions, right? You had to have thousands of people coming. You had to have cranes. You had to have some sort of, devices to take all these, engineering equipment, material to build these places. And all of that constitutes an economic sort of entity. And so I think the question really is not if it was complex or not. The question really is it by default, I think they had a certain level of understanding, definite level of understanding. And the question is, why hasn't that been, not that come out that much prior to this time? But mind you, I'm not saying that in terms of technology. Obviously, in terms of technology, in terms of the pace of information, because of technology, we have come a far way ahead. We are far ahead of those times. There's no denying in some of these basic things. But the underpinning philosophical thinking, the philosophy of building large, temples like this, for example, the philosophy of thinking on economic activity through the idea of Dharma, those philosophical ideas are, I think, still sacrosanct. I mean, those ideas, I think people, in terms of ideas, I think people in ancient India were far ahead of their time. So basically, yeah, I do see a reason why there is an advisor, because I think the statecraft, the society had a structure, the state had a structure, they were involved in massive activities such as, some of these things that I mentioned. Trade was quite rampant as well. So they needed to have systems, and being an advisor is also sort of a part of the machinery, I would put it that way. So I think definitely they had a level of sophistication in terms of ideas, I would say. Whereas some of the other things we might be far ahead today. But in terms of ideas related, because eventually we are still human beings, whether now, 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years later, and human beings make choices based on a variety of factors. And I think those factors haven't really changed a lot, in my view. I think, anyways, yeah, that's how I would say.
Thank you. I think Nishant Bhai is also collecting some of the questions. So Nishant Bhai, please go ahead.
There was one question, which is an interesting one. It says, would you say Kautilya is closer to modern concept of geo-economics or pure economics, or what you call it, unfettered globalization?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think I sort of slightly answered that question earlier on trade, but I think he would be open to engaging in the world, but he's a very shrewd political economist. His aim was political, success. Economic prosperity is a route to political success. Right. So he might be as shrewd, or if not more shrewd than Modi ji. So, yeah. So anyway, so he would be very, very conscious of that. So I think he would be open to engaging with the world, but he would also know when that becomes a liability, and he'll try to sort of ensure that is taken care as well.
A quick comment on the previous question. Somebody asked, like, was economics developed that much? I mean, to my take is very simple. Like, somebody develops that theory, they don't develop theories in vacuum, right? There is a problem, or there is a opportunity that's there, and that's why the theorization of a problem occurs.
No, sorry to butt in, but it is also because people in those times did not communicate the way we communicate today. I'm not saying this is inferior. Right. I'm just saying their way of communication was more poetry, it reflected how they communicated to their people. Our frameworks, our logics, our thinking today, right, is it needs to be put it that way. This book is an attempt to do that, by the way. But I think for people who are interested, they should read Balbir Sihag's book. It's a 2015 book. He's a emeritus professor and a PhD from MIT on where he argues that Kautilya was the original economist. So he provides Kautilya's ideas. It is an academic book. He provides Kautilya's ideas through academic frameworks and theories, and shows how he's ahead of Adam Smith in almost everything. And he showcases that through the Arthashastra itself. That's a brilliant book. So if someone wants to read it, please do as well.
Can you say that name again, Sriram?
His name is Balbir Sihag. The title of the book, I think, is the give me one second. The True Kautilya, the True Founder of Economics. Yeah.
True Founder of Balbir Singh Sihag. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Nishant.
No. Go ahead.
Okay, so since I have the floor here, I can insert my question. So here's my question. So if I heard it correctly, there may be a possibility of the application of Kautilya in modern day culture war and market economy. And I think you may have hinted at that. Did I hear it correctly?
Could you define culture war a bit more?
Well, so for example, like, boycott kind of thing.
Right. And economic activities.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of Bud Light and Target, for example.
Yeah, I get it. I think, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't mention it in that context. I mentioned it in the context of culture as something that helps us to make behavioral choices, commercial choices. So that could include, for example, say, I don't know, if Budweiser says something bad about Hinduism or whatever it is, right? And that offends us, say, for some reason, right? And then we decide to say, we don't want to buy this product. I didn't mean it in that angle. What I meant is, we say, for example, we like to keep our houses clean, right? So to keep our house clean, we take some extra efforts to do that. And we try to avoid certain things. So to facilitate this, we make certain choices. And then we purchase certain goods. So the core is our way of life, our framework of life. And all the choices that we make to sort of enhance our way of life leads to economic choices, which in contemporary world leads to economic choices. And probably in the US it's lesser, but in countries like India, it highly drives economic outcomes more than anything else. There's a reason why, during all our festive calendars, the country basically shuts down. While though we follow the Gregorian calendar, but the actual Indian economy runs on the Dharmic calendar. So
that's a good point.
So that is the mismatch. It's like there's a way of life that drives economic activity, and then the policymaker comes, they put in their worldview. But if we adjust the policies to suit the way of life, it makes it far more efficient because it's very natural to you. So anyway, my this thing was more on that than the cultural wars. I don't know. Kautilya might just go crazy, I think, looking at all these wars.
But not just to add to Avtansbhai's point, not say total boycotts or whatever you want to call it, right? Instead of consciously not making a choice to not buy something is also an economic choice, right?
Right.
Saying, we will not say out loud and say, okay, we boycott this. No, but we just don't want to buy it. So that's also an economic choice. But yeah, go ahead, Bhai. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to mention, because you talked about calendar, and that reminds me, I was reading something, and the author basically said that, we always hear that, monsoon is late this year, monsoon is late this year. I mean, he was basically saying monsoon is never late. It's, it follows the lunar calendar, and it's usually not late. Yeah. So anyway,
and on a lighter note, whenever I wish people birthdays, I always tell them it's a Gregorian birthday, because if someone really understands our calendar system, there's nothing as farcical as the Gregorian calendar. The loony solar calendar that we follow in most, at least in the South, is far more scientific, is far more aligned to nature. Gregorian calendar is the most, it's copy pasted everywhere. It doesn't make logical sense. I don't know. Anyways, so what I'm trying to say is that why it matters for, at least for the narrow confines of economic policy, is that a large sections of booms and busts in economic activity happens largely around, a lot of the festivities that happen in India. So in the US, for example, the highest food sales for anything happens during Thanksgiving, right? In terms of retail sales. Right. Thanksgiving, from beginning of Thanksgiving till end of Christmas, the holiday season, put it that way, right? But in India's case, when you really look at the retail cycle, it's highly aligned to the festival season. So there itself, you see a lot of convergence, I would say.
Next question, you want to take, Nishant Bhai?
Yeah, actually there isn't a question, but just Anubaji and Anuba Prasadji, she's just mentioning a quick comment here. What a fascinating discussion. Thanks Indica for bringing this. Thanks Sriram and Kushagra for the engaging conversation. So,
okay. So all right. If we don't have a question, I have one question, just a very ordinary question. Who do you think, if you think of a comparison, with Kautilya and in today's modern times, as an economist, as also as a policy expert, who would come closer to Kautilya in modern times?
I don't know, because first of all, modern thinkers don't have an idea of, say, Dharma. Okay, they might have an idea of proxy of these cultural observations and, other things like well-being and things like that, which can be incorporated. But yeah, I find it hard. He's a combination of, say, a Friedman plus a Keynes plus someone else from the Dharmic side, put it that way, or from an indigenous Indian social upbringing. But the combination is very difficult. So I find it very difficult to relate to someone who's a modern economist, because he has his policies are there in multiple places, but not one individual has everything that Kautilya has sort of brought to the table, I feel. So he's unique in that sense. Yeah.
Can you also quickly walk through, we talked about lost text. We know that the Arthashastra was lost. Can you just quickly, historically walk through how it got lost and how it got found in a very short way?
Okay. Yeah, so that's the thing, right? It was lost, I don't know when, but my assumption is somewhere in Common Era, because till about 13th, 14th century, even in Cambodia, there's an inscription on Arthashastra that I mentioned.
Okay, let me ask you just slightly differently also. When we talk about lost text, are we talking about the physical manuscript, or are we talking about the text itself?
I'm talking about the physical palm leaf manuscript.
But the text existed, right? In memory or however else.
Correct. It definitely existed, because you can see that across time in various other places.
Right? I've heard many scholars talk about lost text.
References to the text did exist. And there are other authors referring to the text, but we did not have the actual text itself with us for maybe 1,000 years.
Yeah,
I wanted to bring this fact out very clearly, because I have met scholars who claim that it did not exist. So that's why I want you to walk through
which probably my next book would prove some of them wrong, because not just in Kautilya, even Chola, the Pallava empires, they mention about Kautilya in some of the inscriptions, where there's references to, if the text did not exist, or it didn't even come through word of mouth, then how can they refer to Kautilya or Chanakya in some of these places? So the discovery is a very interesting episode. So the first translation of the Arthashastra was by one Mr. Shama Shastri. So Shama Shastri, he was a librarian at the Mysore Oriental Library. So he was the person who was translated. But there's a backstory to it. Very important backstory. There was a Vedic Brahmin from Tanjavur during British rule who discovered the original manuscript. He took it all the way to Mysore, to the Mysore Oriental Library, and deposited it there. During British rule, he had no reason to do it, but somehow that great man did it. And Shama Shastri happened to be the librarian of the Mysore Oriental Library. So it came to his desk. And then he translated it and made it into the first translation in 1915. So that is your first book in 1915, which is written by Shama Shastri. But prior to that is mostly verbal and, in word of mouth. Yeah, that's the product of it. Yeah.
Kushagra, you have anything to add, or you have any other question? Because I think we're coming close to the end.
Yes. So as I was mentioning, references to this text existed. There are many texts that we have on Niti Shastra, which even now we don't have the extant version, but they are referred to in other texts. For example, take Shukra Niti, very famous. If you look at even Arthashastra, how does it begin? Namaha Shukra Brihaspati Bhyam. Shukra and Brihaspati, these are the two great teachers of Arthashastra that Kautilya refers to. We do not have Shukra's Arthashastra, or we do not have Brihaspati's Arthashastra. But there are references to their ideas in other texts that have come up. Similarly, in the case of Arthashastra, you will find references in the Hitopadesha. And much later, even in works of literature, Bhan Bhatt in Kadambari has a very interesting reference in which there is a minister who is advising a new king. And he says that do not follow the principles of Kautilya. The reason being, most likely by this time, Kautilya is associated with shrewdness, crookedness, and maybe the text itself is lost or not entirely understood. So that is how historians are able to tell that this text existed at some point. There is an enduring legacy. But somewhere after the Common Era, the text itself was lost.
Okay, two quick follow-up. There's a lot of legends about Kautilya and Chanakya, and also there is also some people say that what you talked about, Kushagra, that he was kind of put aside as a Buddhist, conspiracy. Would you like to unpack that just briefly, any of you or both of you?
I have not seen references to Kautilya as a Buddhist. Some texts, I think they mention his later conversion to Jainism, but those are usually in the Jain records. The main debate that has existed throughout history is the identification of three people, or actually four people: Kautilya, Chanakya, Vishnugupta, and Vatsyayan, who is the author of the Kanda Shastra. So that debate has continued, because if you identify Kautilya with Chanakya, then you can then argue that this text was actually very influential in the modern empire, because Vishnugupta Chanakya was the prime minister of Chandragupta. So that increases the authority of this text as an actual manual that was implemented. On the other hand, if you see it detached from that context, then as the book itself refers to, it's the collection of various ideas on Arthashastra from a lot of different preceding scholars that Kautilya has compiled and collected. And it is very possible that Kautilya is one of the acharyas of Arthashastra in those days. There were other schools of thinking. So this was in no way the most dominant or the most widely implemented one. So it all depends on the actual historical identification of Kautilya. Sorry, Sriramji, you were also adding something there.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. I was about to say something similar. So.
Yeah, and my claim to fame, if you believe Kautilya existed during Mauryan time, he grew. It is believed that he was in Patliputra, and a place where modern day Fulwari Sharif in Patna, and I grew up pretty close to that area. Just an aside.
There are stories about that as well. For example, many believe that Kautilya was actually born in South India, and then he came to Takshashila as a teacher. He was an acharya in Takshashila for many years, and then he accompanied Chandragupta to Patliputra when he became the king. But that is, again, not the main source that we have for the history of the actual person is Mudra Rakshas. And that is a work of literature. It's not a work of history.
Yeah. Okay, Nishan Bhai, do you have any other question, or shall we close?
No, I think we are officially done with questions.
Okay. Would you like to do the vote of thanks then?
Yes, definitely. So thank you, Kushagra, once again for moderating this very fantastic conversation. Sriramji, glad to have you here. Very nice conversations, and once your second book comes up, we will definitely do another session on this. Aftansbhai again for posing some good questions, and Kotiji on the back-end team in India, Hyderabad, to do all the logistics work and everything. Thank you all the participants who came in, gave us their time and their suggestions, questions. Thank you all. And that's it. Namaskaram.
Namaskaram.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody. Namaste.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Namaste.